What's up, everybody? Man in the Cage podcast host Jeff Brantley here, doing a pop-up episode today. I teased it on episode 96 of the show, so thanks for joining me. Thanks for everyone jumping on. I got some questions through Twitter. Also got some DMs through Twitter, comments, all that type of good stuff for this weekend's action. So go do a little bit of that on today's YouTube live as well. But if you have any questions, any comments, feel free to shoot those to me as I'm going to go through UFC Vegas 29, a little bit of a preview for that card. As normally I put my previews on my Thursday or Friday episode of the podcast, but I did it a little different this week. I had Lance Wright, a new Bellator middleweight, Lance Wright, who's making his Bellator debut coming up on Bellator 261 on episode 96. So I spent most of the episode with him. Did get a little bit into that PFL card last night, a preview for that, but didn't really get too much into this UFC card. So I'm going to preview the main event and then kind of run through the rest of the card real quick, as I do want to get to a little boxing as well on today's show, as even though there is no Teofimo Lopez this weekend fighting George Kambosos, there is still some good fights, still some really good cards coming up this weekend, including Inoue, who's back in action, the monster. I'm very excited to talk about him. So going to go through all that in 1 second, a little bit of a preview for all of that. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Man in the Cage Pod. Same thing on Instagram, as most of you guys do, at Man in the Cage Pod. Go check out the website, maninthecagemmma.show. Everything from a sponsors tab up there to an about page, all that good stuff. Then go check out, as many of you already here on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, though, subscribe now. The Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast YouTube channel. All the episodes, UFC 4 simulations from the video game EA Sports, obviously, and then some of these YouTube lives I've been doing. So you get all of that there. And then if you're into the audio version, go follow and subscribe there as well. That way you get the latest notifications on that end of things. So that's all the details surrounding everything. Again, shout out to the sponsors, DBK Media. Go follow them on Twitter and on Instagram at DBK Media. Check them out online, dbkmedia.co. If you're interested in any of their services, they're the digital marketing agency, guys. You want to go check them out. And then also Bovada, go check them out over there. They have a link for you, bit.ly/the Man in the Cage. You get a bonus, some of that cool stuff. They'll have some offers for you if you use that link. So if you're interested on any of the action coming up tomorrow night, which I'm about to talk about, go over there to bit.ly/the Man in the Cage. Use that link and go over to Bovada right now. All right, let's get a little bit into, and first, I did want to mention this. I almost forgot. Before I get into UFC Vegas 29 and some of that boxing this weekend, I did want to get a little into what we saw last night on PFL 5. And I'm going to get way more into it on Monday, episode 97 of the podcast, when I go through, react to everything from this weekend. So I'll get more into it then. But I did want to mention that we got to do something about MMA judging right now. I mean, it's bad every week, and there's something every week. But what happened last night to Rory McDonald against Gleison Tibau is just, I mean, that is just, I don't know. I don't see how the judges saw it that way. I don't see how they robbed Rory McDonald of that decision. Now, I know there were there's some Twitter followers that I respect too, that follow me. I follow them, media guys. I saw some people saying that they did see it the way the judges saw it last night for Tibau, but I don't understand it, though, to be honest with you. I think it was a robbery, and I had it for Rory McDonald. I think the closest you can see it is 29-28. I saw even some saying 30-27 for Rory McDonald. It was 30-27 or 29-28. I had a 29-28 for Rory McDonald, but come on. I mean, I don't know what we're doing nowadays. And, I see it on, and even during UFC 263 last week, there were points in that card where I thought there should have been 10-8s given out. I thought there should have been other circumstances where the scoring should have been different. And, everyone's got an opinion on it. Everyone's agreeing on different things of MMA judging. I think we can all agree on this, though, that we do need a new system at this point, that we do need something new. This boxing system in mixed martial arts is not working. And if you're going to keep the boxing system, which, okay, that's what everyone's used to, that's what you want to do, fine. But let's have an open scoring then. We got to do something, though, because it's ridiculous that Rory McDonald has to go to decision like that and then realize that two of the judges had it for his opponent, right? So I want to see something done with that, and I'm tired of hearing that, well, he did the better damage in the round. You better be knocking the opponent down. I didn't see Roy. I mean, I know Roy McDonald was going for some takedowns. I know Gleison Tibau was showing off some good takedown defense in that fight, but I mean, to say that he was doing the better damage against McDonald, come on. I mean, maybe at times, but look at the numbers of the stats. McDonald was throwing more punches. He was very efficient with those punches. Was he throwing elite level volume? Was he Justin Gaethje out there? Was he, one of those fighters that's just putting a ton of volume out there? No, he wasn't, but he's very efficient with his strikes. That should count for something. And that's why I'm tired of hearing the the other guy did more damage. Well, he better be getting knockdowns then. If you if you're knocking a guy down, you're doing that kind of damage with less punches, less volume, fine. But he didn't, though. So I have a big issue with that. Anyway, wanted to throw that out there. And I have some other PFL 5 thoughts coming up on Monday's show, actually, episode 97 of the Man in the Cage podcast. And again, you can go check out episode 96, actually out now too. I'd highly recommend to go listen to it. Lance Wright was a great guest to have on the show, talked about his career from Indiana to Colorado at Elevation Fight Team and out there with all those guys, with Justin Gaethje. At one point, Alistair Overeem talks about his friendship with Neil Magny. It's great stuff. He was almost on The Ultimate Fighter. Bad break due to COVID. Then he ended up being signed by Bellator because of it. So he got a great break out of it, actually. Great stuff. Go check it out right now on episode 96. I would go check that out. But let's get into some of the preview today of UFC Vegas 29. And we'll start out with, as I pull up my notes here, that main event of the evening, of course. And in the main event of the evening, we have Dan Ige taking on Chan Sung Jung, as known as the Korean Zombie, obviously, as most people know, obviously. So I'll go through the strengths and weaknesses, then my prediction here in a second, and what keys to the fight for both of these men. Try to wrap it up somewhat short here and simple, and that way I don't go on and on too much as I can sometimes with going through what each fighter does well. But, on the outside looking in, before I read all of that off, Dan Ige is a guy who Ige's had some big wins, some good wins recently, obviously. He's also been in some very close fights. He's also had, a few moments, obviously, where he's tripped up a little bit. But Dan Ige is one of those guys who's always improving, it seems, where his boxing, his striking now, nowhere near the same as it was at the beginning of his career. He's always had that pretty good ground game. He's always had that submission game that he boasts, but he's gotten much better and better every single fight out, it seems, with his striking and his boxing. Now, at some point, where's the talent level? Where's the ceiling? Has he hit his ceiling now? I don't know. We'll talk about it in a second versus the Korean Zombie here. Korean Zombie, on the other hand, a guy who, he did, of course, it's very well known, came to the UFC, had to go back to Korea to perform his duty in the armed services, had to go do it. So he goes and does it. And then he comes back to the UFC, and it hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows for him. He's still a fan favorite. He's still one of my favorites. He's still a lot of people's favorites. I don't know how you could hate the Korean Zombie. And none of his fights have really been that boring. I mean, even the Yared Rodriguez fight was a pretty good battle, right? He ends up losing, but that's only because he gets caught with an up elbow at the almost very last second of that fight in the 5th round. Otherwise, he was winning that fight, and it was a pretty exciting fight all around. So he's had exciting fights. He's still been winning fights here and there, but last time out, he was tripped up by Brian Ortega, T-City. So you have all these things going into this fight for the Korean Zombie, and I even saw an article or an interview out there, I think it was from MMAfighting.com, I believe, that said they interviewed him, and he said he thought about retiring at one point after this fight. So where's his mindset going into this one here against Dan Ige? Very hungry Dan 50K Ige here. That'll be interesting to see going into this matchup coming up on Saturday night. So going through the strengths and weaknesses real quick, what Dan Ige does well. Of course, really solid ground game, aggressive on the ground with the submissions when he gets there, pushes a great pace. I mean, he just fights so hard every time, and that's just Dan Ige's character. And I think it shows in the gym, and I think it shows in his improvements every time out that he is that good, that Dan Ige does push that pace, and he fights really hard every time. So even if you're out skilling him, even if you're beating him up, Dan Ige is going to bring it every single fight. He's got decent kicks, slick striking with his head movement, improved striking constantly. Every single fight, he improves something, uses good movement with the feet, on his feet while striking, all of his footwork. Pretty smart fighter overall. He'll go for that takedown when he needs it. He'll use his grappling when he needs it. He'll use his boxing. He'll use his pace when he needs it. And he dirties up the fight pretty well. I think that's the thing Dan Ige has to do. And when I get into game plans and keys to fights for fighters here, that's going to be one of the things for Dan Ige in this fight. Weakness for him, though. He punches from his hip at times. As Randy Couture was even talking about last night in the PFL, he punches from his hip, but he kind of draws it back as well with his hand. So, that's kind of bad punch technique. It opens himself up for those bigger punches to land from his opponent. So he can get tagged when he's moving forward on you. He can be taken down himself. He'll lose rounds, which is my biggest issue with Dan Ige over the years. And he can be timed and hit pretty well at times too. So overall, a much improved fighter, a very solid fighter, a very exciting fighter in Dan Ige. but he's got some things obviously that lead to these close fights. I mean, there's reasons why a lot of these fights he's winning rounds, but he's not necessarily winning fights or he's winning by split decision. It's because he does take rounds off. He'll lose rounds. He'll get put on his back and sit there for 5 minutes. And I think he's tried to improve on some of that, but still it's there with Dan Ige. All right, Korean Zombie, though, what he does well, then I'll get into the keys, the game plan here, and then my official prediction. But Chan Sung Jung, really good head movement when he's on. Not all the time, but for the most part, he takes his head off the line very well, which is really good, obviously. You want that, especially, I mean, that's the thing that bothers me the most about some mixed martial artists is you go to the boxing world, and boxing, a lot of it, not every boxer, obviously, but most boxers, anyone that has a boxing background, you work so much on that head movement, taking that head off the center line. Sometimes in MMA, you'll get Muay Thai fighters, you'll get some guys who aren't the best at that. But Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, he is very good at that, though. He does take his head off that center line. He's got very good head movement. He likes to push forward on you aggressively when he's striking. And once he's moving forward towards you, he gets on you quickly. So you better have something for him. So for Dan Ige in this fight, when he decides, and it's not all the time he's pushing forward. He's not necessarily a quote-unquote pressure fighter. But when he does decide to move forward on you and get his offense going, you better have something in the works, footwork, something like that to get out of the way, a counter punch, something. Otherwise, he's going to be on you very quickly with everything he has because he closes the distance very, very well. He times his strikes really good as well. Really good timing with everything he does. Patient in the pocket, exploding forward on you. Combinations very clean at times. Good at slipping and ripping punches, that counter punching ability that we've seen from the Korean Zombie over the years. Hand speed is still really good, even though he's getting a little older now. Check uppercut that he throws, very useful tool for him. He'll throw that a lot when you're attacking him. Underrated grappler, underrated scrambler. He's got a good ground game in general, honestly, that I think gets overlooked sometimes, but he's got all of that if he needs to break it out. Such a patient fighter in general. For the most part, he's going to fight the fight that he wants for the most part. Now, he's gotten out of that just a little bit at times recently, and I think it's led to some failures for him. But for the most part, especially before, he went into this, did his service, and even when he came back at times, he has shown that patience as a fighter, though. He changes levels good with all of his sight line, with all of his strikes. So, he'll go to the body, then he'll go to the head. He gets you looking in different places. He'll use feints. Basically, he's an overall a really good fighter, obviously, is the Korean Zombie. He's a fan favorite, but I would say even more so than being a fan favorite, he's a fan favorite because he's a very solid fighter, obviously. You'll get great fighters, or you'll get fighters that are loved by the fans that aren't necessarily technically sound, or, aren't, one area or another they're very, inefficient in. That's not the Korean Zombie, though. He's pretty efficient in every single part of his game. Now, he does have some weaknesses, though, still, like everybody does. His leg kicks, he will get leg kicked quite a bit sometimes. He will eat some of those. Doesn't use a ton of angles. Probably one of my bigger issues with him. He mostly comes forward on a straight line when he is pushing you. So if you do move, you can move on him and you can counter on him. You can counter punch on him if you use better footwork than he does. His right hand can be a little bit loopy at times. And then the last one here from my end on my notes, you can throw punches over the top of his punches as well. So he's very, you can really counter on him, and I think that was the issue in the Brian Ortega fight. And that's why, Ortega T-City, not necessarily known as a guy with his strikes, right? I mean, he's known for kind of a brawling mentality, toughness, but that jiu-jitsu, right? I mean, that's why he's T-City, throwing up triangles, Triangle City. That, so I think everyone thought about Ortega going to that fight like that, but Ortega has some solid boxing skills. And the thing that Ortega did the best in that fight against the Korean Zombie is he exploited a lot of these weaknesses. And that's why he was able to have a lot of success and then get to that title shot here against Alexander Volkanovski, and now on the Ultimate Fighter before they fight for the title, obviously. But he did that because Korean Zombie, again, Chan Sung Jung, he likes to come on a straightforward line a lot of the times. So, Ortega would move off the line. He'd move his head. He'd get off the line with his feet. He'd counter. And Chan Sung Jung was looking very, very, stuck in concrete in that fight. He looked like he couldn't really adjust. He had a lot of issues with that. And I think it's something he needs to improve upon moving forward, coming into this fight against Dan Ige here. Now, keys or the game plan to both men real quick for both men. And then I'll get my prediction out here. The game plan for Dan Ige, like I mentioned a little bit in his strengths, it's got to be to dirty up this fight. Make this a brawling type of fight. He's got to make Chan Sung Jung fight his pace of a fight, which is high tempo, high pace, coming forward on guys, a lot of punches, a lot of combinations exchanged in the pocket, getting you up against the cage, some clinch situations, maybe some, situations where changing levels on guys, trying to get those takedowns and working a grappling. Overall, it's got to be not a total chaotic fight for you, but it's got to be a little bit more of a high tempo pace though for Dan Ige in order to get those wins, because he's not going to have the most clean technical boxing. He's going to have to come forward on you, push the pace, then, be able to use that boxing with that pace to win the exchanges on the feet, then maybe get you to the ground, or at least, again, use that pace on the feet. So he's got to make this fight his fight. If he doesn't, Chan Sung Jung is going to pick him apart, because the Korean Zombie, what he wants to do in this fight, I would say stay away from that Yair Rodriguez type of fight, right? Don't get into those brawling type of fights. I know every fighter and every fight fan out there, you want to see exciting fights, but for him, I would say don't engage with a lot of these. Try to counter, try to be smart on Dan Ige here. Don't make this into one of those high tempo, more chaotic type of fights. Use your counters, press forward when you can, use your good footwork, try to not come on that straight line towards guys, and don't get countered like he was in the Ortega fight. And he's going to have a lot of success, and use that takedown defense. Korean Zombie's got very good takedown defense, which could, be very, very useful in this fight. That Dan Ige is, I don't want to say he's a poor man's type of fighter, and I'm not trying to rip anybody, if Dan Ige ever heard that. I'm not trying to rip Dan Ige. I think he's got a lot of skills, but Dan Ige is also not Calvin Kattar, I would say. I would say he's not Max Holloway, right? He's not going to go out there and just piece you up, probably. He's got to do certain things. He's got to make it more of a high-paced type of fight in order to have success against you. If Chan Sung Jung goes out there and he fights his fight, he's super technical, I think it's his fight to win probably here, where I think he's smart. I think he counters. I think he's more crisp. And I don't think Dan Ige wants a fight necessarily where it's all striking for 5 rounds, which it could be here because of how good Chan Sung Jung is at keeping the fight on the feet. So those are the keys, the game plan to both men. Which is going to happen, though? I was going to come into this and maybe pick Dan Ige because of what we've seen from Chan Sung Jung recently. The Yair Rodriguez fight, it was a little bit of a higher pace type of fight. Now, he was winning that, and that's another reason why I'm actually going to go with the Korean Zombie in this fight. That I didn't like what I saw from that fight, where he did oblige a little bit. He did go into, more places, more pockets, situations, more exchanges where he shouldn't have been in that fight. But he still was winning the fight up to that 5th round, okay? So, and I think Yair Rodriguez has actually gotten a bad rap. Like, when they announced the Holloway fight, listen, Holloway was going to win now that Holloway's pulled out too, but Holloway's going to win. I still think he's going to win that fight easily if they fight. But I think Rodriguez has had kind of a bad rap, though, that Rodriguez he's been inactive. He's had injuries, other reasons he hasn't been very active. But when he has fought, he's very explosive. He's very dynamic. He's a very different type of fighter, very different type of striker compared to a lot of fighters. So I was impressed still in that fight with the Korean Zombie. I think he's just got to be a little more patient than that, keep picking the spots. And I think he would have had success in that fight. Ortega fight. Again, it was that Ortega was very smart in that fight. Now, can Dan Ige do that? I guess so. But I really have not seen that from Dan Ige necessarily. I mean, even the Edson Barboza fight, was he having some success on the feet? Yes, he was. As, again, his boxing can be very clean at times. But I also think in that fight, he did need to eventually start to get some of those takedowns, start to get in some of those clinch situations. I think he's going to have a little bit of a hard time with that against the Korean Zombie. So I'm going to pick the Korean Zombie here to get back in the win column. Am I extremely confident in that? No, because of a lot of reasons. As I just said, Chan Sung Jung has tripped up a lot lately. I don't trust him not to go into some of these higher pace type of fights and not be smarter to take himself out of that. I also think that going into this fight here for the Korean Zombie, having all these defeats that he's had recently, where's his head at? Because, and again, I brought up the interview earlier that he said he was thinking about retiring. Where does it say his mentality is at right now? That's not a good look. That's not a good sign necessarily. I'll still go with him, though, because I still think he wouldn't have come back. And I think he's the type of guy, type of fighter that I think he's super brutally honest with everything. And I think when he says that, hey, I thought about retiring, but, I didn't think about it long and then I came back, I do believe him. I do think he probably does want to fight still. So I'm going to go with the Korean Zombie here by decision, we'll say. I don't think he knocks out Dan Ige. And, the other side of this, I don't think obviously Dan Ige knocks out the Korean Zombie either. I think we're going to get 5 rounds of something, and somebody's going to get their hand raised at the end of that. And I'll go with the Korean Zombie in this one in the main event of UFC Vegas 29 coming up on Saturday. But should be an interesting fight. Obviously, should be somewhat eventful, and should be somewhat of a technical fight, some sort of a fight that we'll see some brawling exchanges when Dan Ige tries to push the pace. I'm looking forward to it coming up on Saturday. Let me check my time real quick. I'm about 20 minutes right now. Look to go about another 10 minutes or so here, another 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'll get on out of here. So that was UFC Vegas 29's main event. I'll go through the rest of this card real quick. And again, if you have any other thoughts after I jump off here or comments, tweet at me at Man in the Cage Pod. Same thing on Instagram at Man in the Cage Pod. Had a bunch of thoughts coming in on Twitter. That a lot of people some people picking Dan Ige, who's a slight favorite. Some people picking the Korean Zombie Chan Sung Jung. This is one of those fights where I think most people are kind of straight down that middle a little bit with this Vegas betting line, and I could honestly see it going the other way too. And by the way, before I move to the co-main event, the rest of the card real quick, really no size advantage in this fight, really. I mean, Korean Zombie's got an inch reach advantage, about an inch of a reach advantage. It's not much, though. It's not, obviously, it's not very much at all. Both are orthodox fighters. Both are 5'7". They both weighed in at the limit today. And I believe I was watching all the weigh-ins early. Everyone weighed in actually at the limit, which is good for UFC Vegas 29 moving forward here, as unless something crazy happens overnight, we should get every single fight that's scheduled as of right now coming up on tomorrow's night's card. The rest of the card, though, as I was saying, co-main event, Alexei Oleinik versus Sergey Spivak, heavyweight matchup. And a fun heavyweight matchup here because I could see upset city coming from Alexei Oleinik, or I could see Sergey Spivak officially retiring Alexei Oleinik in this fight. Something's got to give a little bit. I'm going to go with Spivak in this one, though, as I do think when I say retire, I mean, obviously, maybe Oleinik fights again. We'll see. I mean, maybe he goes and does grappling tournaments, or he goes to Bellator or something. But it's becoming abundantly clear, though, that Oleinik has to get fights into a certain area, right? He has to get into those grappling exchanges. He can't really strike with guys for very long now. His chin is so compromised. His striking in general, he just throws those big looping bombs over the top, which are effective sometimes. But he is what he is now, right? So against elite level heavyweights, like, Oleinik, I guess if he grappled Ngannou down to the floor and got him in something quickly, maybe he could beat Ngannou. But 8 or 9 out of 10 times now, especially with Ngannou's improved takedown defense, you're picking Ngannou round 1 knockout, right? Stipe Miocic, you give the point. You go down the line here, Oleinik, where's his path to the title in this division? He's got really no future. Is he gatekeeper now? I guess so, and that's what this fight is against Sergey Spivak. And what is Sergey Spivak? He's 12-2 now. He's had his share of little bumps in the road, but he wrote the ship the last time out, and now he gets a chance here at Alexei Oleinik, the boa constrictor, the legend. And I think he'll beat him here. And this is the tough part of this fight, though, that Sergey Spivak will get he is willing to get the fight to the mat. He wants to get the fight to the mat sometimes. The polar bear does, to get the fight on the mat, use his grappling, use some of that ground and pound. He will use some of his striking here and there, though. He's a little too welcoming to exchanges sometimes, a little too flat-footed. So there's enough little red flags in Sergey Spivak's game that, and especially the one where he's willing to go to the ground, that I'm not completely, again, I mean, I'm probably more confident in the Korean Zombie beating Dan Ige than I am in Sergey Spivak beating Alexei Oleinik, to be honest with you, because of all those. Because if he goes down to the mat here, I mean, you're going to talk about what? Maybe another Ezekiel choke. We saw one last night on PFL 5. Will we see another Ezekiel choke come out of Alexei Oleinik here? Do we see, another bulldog choke? Do we see something like that against Sergey Spivak? I mean, he's so crafty on the ground. Spivak's got to be careful in this fight if he does go there. So there's enough red flags where I got almost no confidence in this pick. But I'll go Sergey Spivak because he's younger. He was the heavier fighter today. I think the plan will be, obviously, try to engage in striking exchanges here, pick him apart moving forward on you, use some footwork, try to hit him on the way in. And then if he does go to the ground, don't go down there with him. Or if you are going to go to the ground with him, you better make sure that you are ready to grapple with Alexei Oleinik. Otherwise, you're going to get submitted from the ground. But that's, the main event. I see that one going the distance. I don't see the co-main event going the distance. I think either Oleinik's going to get knocked out, pounded down on the ground, or he finds a submission from bottom or submission somewhere on the ground, or something like that against Sergey Spivak, and maybe he retires. Maybe that'll be his riding off of the sunset moment on UFC Vegas 29. But I'll take Spivak because he's younger. there's enough red flags, though. I think you can entertain the idea of Oleinik winning that one. Maybe one of the best fights of the night. Maybe, one of those fights that you definitely have to think could be fight of the night. Up next on this main card, you have Marlon Chito Vera taking on Davy Grant. Davy Grant always down for a brawl, and that's why I have Marlon Chito Vera getting the knockout here. Vera at times, he's one of those fighters. He's a little like Devison Figueiredo, where does he put some volume together at times, actually even maybe somewhat better than Figueiredo sometimes? And I know they're in different weight classes, obviously. Actually, Figueiredo might be joining him in the bantamweight division before you know it here. But, he's a little like Figueiredo in the bantamweight division, where he has a little bit more volume, but he's mostly looking for those big, just finishing shots. He's throwing kicks to your liver. He's throwing elbows in the clinch. He's having some nasty Thai boxing on you. He gets you to the ground. He's looking for that submission. Marlon Chito Vera will always be a fan favorite. And he gets in these wars. He gets tagged a little bit. He's got a pretty good chin, obviously. So that mixed with Davy Grant should lead to an exciting fight, a fight of the night candidate. But I think he will find the finish here against Davy Grant. As I said, Grant's willing to oblige him a lot of the times. A lot of fighters in these exchanges. And I think it's going to be bad news for him, as Marlon Vera has stated. I think he's been out there saying all week that he's learned a lot of things from his past fights, which is scary because he's had a lot of finishes. Obviously the Sean O'Malley fight. O'Malley can say whatever he wants that he's never lost. He got his leg destroyed in that fight, or at least he got a couple kicks that destroyed his leg in that fight. So Marlon Vera, we've seen a very good Marlon Vera over the years here. I think he finds the stoppage here. I also think we see a knockout here from Marlon Vera against Davy Grant on that one on UFC Vegas 29. The rest of this card, Julian Erosa taking on Seung-Woo Choi. This could go either way. I could really see Erosa winning it or Choi getting the job done. I'm going to go with Erosa on that one, though. I think Julian Erosa gets the job done against Choi. Could be another explosive one. I think the main event goes the distance, as I keep saying, but some of these I could see not going the distance, including this one with Choi. But I'll go with Erosa. I'll go with the upset in this one over Choi, but Choi is very solid, though, obviously. Choi is very, very solid, and there's not really a size advantage here. And, not a pick 'em. Choi right now, according to most sports books, sitting around minus 140, Erosa at plus 120. I think that's probably about right, maybe a little closer. But I'll go Julian Erosa, that one, for the upset. Wellington Turman taking on Bruno Silva. Turman also a slight underdog in this one. I'm going to go another underdog spot here. Bruno Silva, I think he could go out there and spark him in the first round. Think he could go out and melt Turman in the first round here. But I like Turman's game a lot. I think he's the better overall fighter here. And I would think that this actually should be sort of a pick 'em, but I would actually flip the line here. I think Turman should be minus 130, minus 140 favorite, something like that, minus 150. A guy who's 16-4 in his career. He's not overly experienced. What we've seen from him, he's not overly, I won't say great. I'm not trying to, again, rip anybody. So I would say maybe around that minus 140 area, but I think he's a better fighter here compared to Bruno Silva in that middleweight matchup. And then the fight that'll kick off the UFC Vegas 29 main card, Matt the Immortal Brown taking on Diego Lima. A striker's delight, a finisher's delight, we'll say for the sake of this fight, a loser goes, and I've said it on a couple other cards, a loser goes home type of match, where whoever loses this fight, we'll see where the UFC, how do they think about that fighter moving forward? Diego Lima coming off of a loss against Bilal Muhammad, Matt Brown coming off of some losses himself, including to Miguel Baeza. Now, it's not a bad loss. It's Miguel Baeza, but it's very clear now that Matt Brown is super compromised, super old. Diego Lima, also a guy who you think of him as being old, but he really hasn't been necessarily. Obviously, he doesn't have the status that Matt Brown does. So is he a little fresher? Does he have a little bit better of a chin? I guess so in this fight. Matt Brown comes forward. He likes to sling those big elbows. Diego Lima hits hard himself, though. He's going to have his brother Douglas Lima, who's in his corner. I'm sure they're a little mad that Douglas Lima lost that fight to Yaroslav Amosov at Bellator 260 for the welterweight title. So I think the Lima brothers are going to come out on top here. I think Diego Lima gets the job done. If Matt Brown had some sort of chin left, he had some sort of anything left, to be honest with you, that I think he could, turn back Father Time a little bit, which it's always possible. It's always possible you could turn back Father Time, but I just have not seen anything since his first fight back. Since he had that layoff, 2 years of medical leave, then he came back. What was it? UFC 245, I believe, the Usman Covington card. He came back and he got a win there, a finish. I was actually in the building in Vegas, so it's pretty cool to see him get a knockout victory on that card. But since then, he's looked older again. And, at the time, even in that fight, he was facing somebody who was a better matchup for him. Matt Brown, I'm not going to say he should never fight again. Again, another guy who could go to Bellator, could probably have success in the PFL, could probably have success in other organizations around the world. Maybe even here against Diego Lima, not a great fighter by any stretch of the imagination. Young Matt Brown probably beats Diego Lima maybe almost every day of the week. But, he's still Diego Lima. He's still a little bit younger here. I think he might have something to offer Matt Brown here that he's not ready for. So I think Diego Lima, I think he probably chin checks him at some point, knocks him out. The flip side of that, Lima has been stopped before. So, Matt Brown could hit him with an elbow from hell and just send him to a dark place. But I'll go Diego Lima, but I think either way here, I think there's going to be a finish in that fight. So, after all, after going through all this, actually, it didn't even dawn on me until I just went through it. But I'm picking maybe Turman Silva could go the distance. But I'm picking most of these fights, I think, on the main card besides the main event, and then maybe Turman Silva to go to not go the distance. So it should be an action-packed, entertaining UFC Vegas 29 main card coming up on Saturday night. And the rest of the prelims, I want to get into some boxing. I'm already at 30 minutes, so I'm going to go get to that real quick. But the rest of this card, though, I do think there's some really interesting spots. Verna Janjidoba, she's in action, taking on Kanako Murata. That's going to be a good fight. Chaos Williams on this card, Josh Parisian, Roku Martinez, Rick Glenn, or as he wanted to be called, I guess he's going to be called moving forward today. If you missed that at the UFC Vegas weigh-ins today, he says he wants to be called Ricky Glenn moving forward. So Ricky Glenn taking on Joaquin Silva. And then one of the, I think, better fights of the night actually is one of the opening fights. Laura Procopio taking on Casey O'Neill. Both those women, one loss between them. And obviously over 10 wins as Casey O'Neill 6-0. Procopio is 7-1. So that's going to be a very, very good fight to start the night in the women's flyweight division. And a good test for Casey O'Neill. What is she? What is Casey O'Neill and Laura Procopio? That's going to be very interesting coming up on UFC Vegas 29. And I'll have all my picks tweeted out tomorrow. If you want anything specific, tweet at me again at Man in the Cage Pod, or get on Instagram at Man in the Cage Pod. All right, boxing real quick, because there is so much boxing this weekend still. And very exciting boxing because Inoue's back in action. The monster. I love watching Inoue fight. Very excited to see him on that ESPN main card. Also, Michaela Mayer, she's defending her WBO women's junior lightweight title. That should be a great one as well. So still a lot of boxing this weekend. You thought when we lost Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos that this would be the whole card itself. You lose the main event, you lose the whole card. Most weekends or some weekends, you might not have much boxing left. But there's still a lot this weekend. You got Nayo Inoue taking on Michael Das Marinas for Inoue's IBF and WBA bantamweight titles. Listen, I know Inoue is just what he does in the boxing ring, what he did to Nonito Donaire in their fight, and what he did to, was it Jason Maloney? I get the Maloney brothers mixed up. Jason Maloney his last time out. What he did against those guys. And, he's done it his whole career, but now you're really seeing it on the mainstream level of what Inoue's been able to do. They call him the monster, and he really is that monster. I've been watching MMA and boxing for years and years and years and years now, right? I've been watching it a long time. Maybe some of you out there have been watching it. Maybe you've been alive longer than I've been alive. So maybe, and I'm not trying to go ageism here or anything. Don't worry. But maybe some of you out there have been alive longer than I've been in my 30 years on this planet. But for most of my 30 years here, obviously, I've been a fight fan. Inoue, for my money, is, especially the bantamweight division, one of the most craftiest, one of the most fun, one of the most entertaining fighters to watch, just because of his footwork, how he works into range, how he's still defensively sound when he works into range, how he works the body, then goes upstairs, and he's throwing nasty shots. He's putting shots on your liver. He's putting shots to the head. He's going multiple combinations. He's timing everything. He's got a good sense of when to press forward, when to, lay off the gas. He's just so beyond his years in a way, is that even as a fighter right now that he's 20-0 in his career with 17 knockouts, he fights like a guy who, as 40 fights, he fights like a guy like Canelo Alvarez. I don't have Canelo's stats up here, but, Canelo Alvarez obviously over 50 fights in his career already. Inoue does not have that. And he's 28 years old. So he's way beyond his years, is Inoue. Now, he does have an opponent here in Das Marinas who is obviously pretty solid. I mean, he's got a solid record, at least 30-2 in his career. Das Marinas, as I pull up his here, comes from the Philippines. He's coming off of a TKO win himself. He's a formidable opponent here. But in a way, at the end of the day, he's going to get the job done here. It's just, maybe other cards, maybe other bantamweights. Maybe if it was a Maloney brother here, maybe I'd say, you know what, Das Marinas, he's got a decent shot in this fight. I think it'll be interesting. But it's Inoue. And Inoue destroys everybody. I mean, recommended viewing out there. ESPN has, I believe, I don't know if it was on the regular ESPN or if it was on ESPN, just on ESPN Plus, but it's up on ESPN Plus right now, or ESPN On Demand. They have a special right now out there, a little mini documentary, like 25 minutes. It won't take too much of your time, on Inoue and where he came from in Japan, his father, his family, what it means to him. The Donaire fight, in which he had the first part of that fight, he's getting tagged badly. He can't see it. He's seeing double out one of his eyes. He has a broken orbital bone, fights through it. He starts tagging Donaire late in the fight, hurts Donaire, almost knocks him out with that body shot, picks him apart, wins the fight, wins the belt, and really jumped into the mainstream. They go over his whole career, all that. It's great stuff. It's recommended viewing. It's called The Monster, obviously, Inoue. So go check it out. It's all over on ESPN. I loved it. And just watching that, I mean, it just shows you the prolificness of someone like an Inoue and how great he is. And I just get so giddy watching him every single time. So I'm excited to see him put on a show coming up Saturday night on ESPN. And again, for you, sometimes the pay-per-view is like the Teofimo Lopez card. You either got to buy it, right, or you got to go somewhere. These ESPN cards are nice when you get talents like Inoue on there, where you don't have to go pay anything. Outside of like the cable bill or something, right? But you don't have to pay like the $60 or whatever it is to go watch the pay-per-view or go watch it somewhere else. So we get to see Inoue for almost free. We'll say almost free coming up on Saturday night. It should be a good fight. And I'm picking him to get the knockout in this one. I think middle rounds 3, 4, 5, maybe 6. He puts away Das Marinas and that one. Now there's a co-main event on that one that's pretty good too, and I'll get into that one. Not going to go through every single fight again. So many of them, and I'm already over what I said I was going to do. So I'm just going to go over a few more here and then get out of here. But there is another title fight on that card. Michaela Mayer taking on Erica Farias. That is 10 rounds for Mayer's WBO Women's Junior Lightweight title. Going to pick Michaela Mayer on this one. There's also another, funny enough, another little video package out there, a little documentary on ESPN. And that one's about Michaela Mayer. About her, her younger life going into USA Boxing. I covered her a little bit back in the day, actually, when she was making a run at the 2012 National Championship. Really, really cool to see everything she's done in her career and hearing her perspective on things. And one of the quotes that stuck out to me the most from Michaela Mayer in this video package, or this little documentary ESPN had, was they were talking about Andre Ward. He was narrating the piece. He's actually interviewing her. Of course, Andre Ward now works for ESPN. He's talking to her and he asks her, should women's boxing be 3-minute rounds? Should it be, championship fight here? Should it be 12 rounds, 3 minutes like the men do? I've interviewed Jeremy Harriges. I've interviewed my guy Jason over at Glove Talk. Everybody, other boxing guys have had on the show. Every fight fan, pretty much everybody says, yeah, obviously there should be 3-minute rounds, 12 rounds, title fights like the men do. But her take on this documentary was pretty refreshing, actually. Her answer was not that she didn't want to fight 3 minutes, 12-minute rounds, but she was saying if you're gonna make me go fight 3 minutes now for 12 rounds, then you need to pay the women more because you're not paying us enough anyway. And I thought that was a great answer, and that's very refreshing to hear from Michaela Mayer, a different perspective, because everyone just says, yeah, you have to go do it, but she's saying, well, women in boxing are being discriminated against a little bit. It's why Clarissa Shields has decided to try her hand at mixed martial arts. I like that answer from Michaela Mayer. But this fight, getting back to this fight right here against Farias, I think she wins it again. Michaela Mayer, very smart fighter. She uses her combinations. Her punches are so straight, so long. And when she gets in range with you, she starts firing off. She's very accurate. She can start sniping you with all of those combinations, and she'll put off 2, 3, 4 punches at a time on you. I think Michaela Mayer gets another victory here, retains her title over Erica Farias in that one. And then there's some other good fights, Adam Lopez, Isaac Dogbo, and some ones down this card that'll be interesting as well on that ESPN card. All right, one more boxing card. There is also, I'll briefly mention it in a second. the Anderson Silva, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fight coming up in Mexico. That is a pay-per-view actually on Saturday. I'll get to that real quick because there's already shenanigans happening today, as most of you maybe have seen yet. I'll go over that in a second. But the Houston card on Showtime here, Showtime Boxing, Jamal Charlo taking on Juan Macias Montiel for Charlo's WBC middleweight title. I think Charlo's going to retain in this one. I also see another knockout in this one, like the Inoue fight. I think his is going to be a little bit later, though. Charlo, while he doesn't have that perfect power, doesn't have the power necessarily for the middleweight division that an Inoue does for the bantamweight division. Charlo still has quite a bit of power. I think late in this fight, he's going to be in front of his hometown crowd. I think he eventually peppers him, beats him down enough where I think he does stop Montiel some point in this fight. And I think it's going to probably be rounds 8, 9, 10, something like that. But I'm also looking forward to that one too. I mean, anytime the Charlo brothers are in action, and I think this fight's actually been overlooked a little bit. It's very good. But you just look at the who Charlo's been fighting. I mean, he's been fighting very, very good opponents here, good opponents. So I think he's definitely going to get the job done. And not saying Montiel hasn't fought good opponents, but you look at his record, and he does have 22 wins, all 22 wins coming by way of knockout. But like James Kirkland his last time out. I mean, how old is James Kirkland nowadays? And that was 2020. Yeah, I mean, Kirkland's 37 years old now. I mean, not saying it's a bad win. And it's not, anytime you beat a guy like James Kirkland's still 34-2 at the time of that fight. But anytime you're beating guys like that are 37, I just think the quality of opponents for Charlo has been better. I think he's just a higher step up than Montiel in this one. So I'm going to pick him to win that one in that fight. And then there's some other great fights on that card too. I mean, Angelo Leo taking on Aaron Almeida, Isaac Cruz Gonzalez versus Francisco Vargas. 10-round clash. Our guy over here on the podcast, the Man in the Cage podcast, Jeremy Harriges, he has a piece out there right now on Gonzalez versus Vargas. You should go check it out. He's on Twitter at @ABoxingWriter, capital A Boxing Writer. He has a piece on the bad blood between those two. So good Showtime card as well. Some good boxing coming up this weekend. And then, I didn't even mention there's a DAZN card too. You have some, let me see who's on the show. Yes, you have Jamie Mungaya taking on Camille Sarazmeta. 12 rounds for the 12 rounds, not for a middleweight belt, just 12 rounds in the middleweight division there. But Mungaya, obviously a very good fighter as well. So that DAZN card is going to be very good. That card coming up on Showtime and on ESPN, also very good. And then, as I mentioned, I have to tease it, and I know, again, I'm way over here, but I'm going to get out of here in 1 second here. But one more for you. I have to dive into real quick. That is Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. taking on Anderson Silva. It's going to be a circus. It's Anderson Silva's pro boxing debut here, but it's at cruiserweight. I believe it's at cruiserweight. They said it was supposed to be, but Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. today weighed in over the limit again. Once again, I mean, how many times has Chavez Jr. missed weight? It's incredible. At this point, you can't make it up with this guy. How many times he's missed weight? I mean, even for a fight here, which in all intents and purposes, to me, in my opinion, I know Anderson Silva's not going to, dumb his career down to make it an exhibition, but Anderson Silva's never boxed in his life. Yes, he's Thai boxed. He's been in a mixed martial arts octagon, the UFC, for many years. So it's not like he's afraid to go box, but he's never actually just boxed with somebody. So, first time out here especially against someone like Chavez Jr., who at one point, although I've always thought he was kind of a fraud, I used to do a boxing show on a college radio station, and I'd always make fun of him. And this was like the heyday, like, oh, Chavez Jr., he's going to be something. I always said, no, he's going to be, I don't think he is what everybody says he is. He is what he is, and sure enough, I mean, that's kind of what he is now. Obviously, he's fighting Anderson Silva. Maybe a big payday, maybe not. I don't know what he's getting paid for this. And he just lost $100,000 too. He had $100,000 because he missed weight. It's going to go to Anderson Silva, which is funny enough there. I mean, you think about this circus sideshow, and then he has to give up the money. Whatever. The fight itself, though, I'm going to go Cesar Chavez Jr. I think he gets the win. Listen, Anderson Silva is just not – he's a counterpuncher. I think he's going to do the typical Silva thing where he tries to look flash. He tries to do some cool things. I think he'll make a miss a couple times. Wouldn't surprise me if he hit him with something or something big. But big part of Anderson Silva's game, especially later on in his career here, has been the Muay Thai. It's been the knees, been the elbows, been the some of those kicks. Now he doesn't have to worry about getting kicked now, which I do think the legs after that devastating Chris Weidman injury back in the day have really took a toll on his legs, but he's not going to have to worry about getting leg kicked now. He's just going to have to worry about punching, obviously. But I still think the volume-wise, I think Chavez Jr. is going to treat this like a boxing match. Anderson Silva is going to treat this like a MMA bout, right? So I think Chavez Jr. is going to get the win. I don't know if it'll be pretty. I have no idea what this fight's going to be like. I'm actually somewhat curious, but I'm not too. I mean, because Anderson Silva, I mean, if he knocks him out, then I'll be really intrigued what Anderson Silva does moving forward. But I doubt that. I think it's probably going to be Chavez Jr. beating him up to a late stoppage, probably, or just a decision in that one. And then his dad's on the card. Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. taking on Hector Camacho, a middleweight exhibition. That'll be interesting to say the least. I guess for nostalgia's sake, that'll be fun to watch that one. But that's all the boxing coming up this weekend. So much. Thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate you on this pop-up episode of The Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast joining me. I went way over what I wanted to. I probably knew I was going to, though, because there's so much coming up this weekend, and I wanted to get it to everybody out there. So, and maybe I'll throw this on the back end of the episode, replace the PFL stuff. That way you can check out episode 96 of the podcast. But still, even I will do that probably. I'll throw this on the back end of it for everybody out there so you can check out the preview on the end of episode 96, because I want you to go back and listen to the episode I put out there with Lance Wright. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning now, if you're just now joining me, just now watching this, Lance Wright, Bellator new middleweight, not middleweight, new middleweight, new Bellator middleweight, Lance Wright. He joined me on episode 96. He talked about his career, his journey to Bellator, everything that went on from almost being on tough to now getting the Bellator shot, to his opponent, Taylor Johnson, coming up, his prediction, which you won't want to miss, all of that. Go check it out on episode 96 of the Man in the Cage podcast. And I'll probably throw this on the back end of it too, probably, just for sake of the show. That way you can, as my phone falls, live shows, right? That way you can check out everything on episode 96 of the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. All right, again, follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Man in the Cage Pod. Go to the website, maninthecagemmma.show, for everything, including sponsors tab. If you're interested in joining the show, please do so. Would love to shout you out on the program, like DBK Media, like Bovada. Also check out the About page there. All the other stuff on the website. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast YouTube channel, and then the audio version of everything on Anchor, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. All right, let's enjoy the fights, enjoy the festivities coming up on Saturday night, and then I'll talk to everybody coming up Monday, episode 97 of the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. So enjoy your weekend, enjoy your time off, and I'll talk to everybody later.